There are choices that shape everything. Tiny, ordinary forks and days that look like any other, until one of them opens and refuses to close. Daphne knows this the way a woman knows the pattern of her child's breath in the dark. No thought, only muscle memory and a slow, horrible awareness when that rhythm stops. She comes home with the smell of diner grease in her hair and the late-night hum in her bones. The kitchen light is off. The living room couch bears the indentations of a single person rather than the scatter of family. Her keys click and sound enormous in the quiet. She calls Mia's name before she sees the empty bed, before she sees the jacket tossed over the back of a chair that still smells like the faded sweetness of something Mia left at the house that morning. An orange crayon, a sticker with a cartoon fox. The voice that answers the phone is small and tight. "Mom?" Her mothering is a muscle she has never not used. Daphne does a quick sweep. Bathroom, closet under the stairs, backyard swing set with its one unlatched latch. The back gate is closed and latched as if someone was careful enough for ordinary mischief. A plate sits cooling on the kitchen table. 2 cups. One of them half drunk, lipstick smudged. Her hands fold into themselves. The house holds its breath with her. She calls Jake at the deli, 3 blocks away, where he takes the night shift to keep school lunches paid and rent current. He answers on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and irritation. "What's wrong?" "Mia," Daphne says. "She's not here." "What do you mean? She left this morning." "I came home." "You're at home?" "Yes, Jake, Her voice breaks, but she does not let it fall apart. "Go home. Call the neighbors. I think—" He hangs up before she finishes, the click like a small dismissal. Outside, somewhere, a siren wails and then recedes. The streetlight throws a pale coin of light over the sidewalk. The rest of the cul-de-sac sits like a mouth closed against sound. Choice 1, complacency and denial. The first choice is never dramatic. It is the soft, slow refusal of 1,000 small warnings until finally only the loud ones remain. Daphne had been making that choice a long time, taking the extra shift, telling herself the rent won't wait, that a tired child would sleep fine alone for a couple of hours. She had learned to swallow the ache that came from staying away. It made space for meals, for bills, for a future that never quite arrived. It also left a night open to whatever, a knock, a curiosity, something darker that drifts on the edges of towns and finds all the little unlatched places. Flashback. 2 weeks ago, a mother across the street throws a casserole at Daphne's door. "You shouldn't leave her," she says. Daphne wonders then if it's judgment or care. She smiles and says, "We all have to work," a truth that tastes like coin. The neighbor's voice tightens, "Or we all have to keep watch." She closes the door on the woman and laughs with the cashier at the shift, the laugh making a small, brittle sound. She tells herself she is doing right by everyone. She believes it because she must. Now she's in the kitchen with a phone that feels too light, and outside her window, the garden street is a smear of shadow and lamplight. The house that always seemed like refuge is an island with a thin shoreline. Daphne drives in a blur of street lamps and tired steering. She runs a hand along the leather of the steering wheel, the way someone smooths a living thing to sleep. The police station smells like recycled coffee and the paper husk of officers finishing a long shift. The desk sergeant takes her statement with an efficiency that keeps movement between the words. "Give her time," he says by rote. "Most youngsters come back. Kids run off for an hour. We get them home. Have you checked with friends?" She waits until her voice loses its edge, and then, when the sergeant's eyes flick to the clock behind him, she forces a smile. "She's 5, she tells him. "She doesn't run off." "Still, sometimes—" The man searches the right phrase. He presses his pen against the pad, a little too comfortably, like it's an instrument that keeps him from feeling. "We can't file a missing persons report until 24 hours in most cases. There's protocol." Choice 2, trusting the familiar. Daphne grew up giving people the benefit of things that were often not deserved. Mr. Hart had been part of that neighborhood's furniture for as long as she could remember. Bread delivered when winters came early, a lawn that looked like a postcard, a voice that pitched into his porch light and offered, "If you need anything." He had given Mia stickers, had told her stories about trains that ran through town long before the highway. There was a way of being around Mr. Hart that felt like shelter. When the paperboy left a bundle of leaflets folded at his feet, and Jake said he seemed fine, a relief sits in Daphne like a soft blanket. She calls the neighbors. Mrs. Adebayo hears her panic through the door and opens, the hallway light painting silver on her face. "You went to work, I saw you," she says. "I remember the kids playing." Her voice cracks as she talks around a thought that could become accusation. The neighborhood begins to fold in on itself, sentences unfinished, webs of meaning left dangling. Mr. Hart stands on his porch with a thermos in both hands, the steam curling in the cold like a promise. "Daphne, love," he says, and everything in his tone is warming, carefully adult. "You look." He eyes the empty minivan in her driveway. He reaches out in what looks like concern. "We were just talking about that little Mia," he adds, voice soft. "You know how children wander. Maybe she went to the bakery. Kids like sweets." She wants to believe him. Trust is the grease that keeps a neighborhood moving. Without it, you end up suspicious and alone. She had chosen trust most of her life. She had chosen trust the neighbors, trust the house, trust that the world tended towards the small mercies that made living bearable. Mr. Hart offers to help and offers his truck. He suggests they check the canal, the strip mall where teenagers sometimes congregate. Daphne agrees because refusing would feel like naming a possible betrayal. It's easier to let the familiar be good. They walk a route that follows arterial neighborhoods and spent lights. The town smells of frying oil, of wet leaves, of a faint chemical tang from the old mill. A kid on a skateboard sneaks down an alley and stares. An old man under a street lamp begs for spare change. No one seems to have seen a small girl in a Fox sticker shirt. When they return, Mr. Hart suggests walking the park. He points out the big willows where kids climb and the benches where parents gossip. His hand rests briefly on Daphne's shoulder in a gesture that should read as comfort. She lets it, the way one allows an arm around grief. There is a comfort to it, a safety in a familiar face. But there is also a small animal's warning inside her, a feel for the shiver that arises when something in a person aligns wrong with what they're saying. A boy in a hoodie darts by, something white catching on his sleeve like a bandage. Daphne runs after him. He disappears down the side of a grocery store and the light swallowing him like a mouth. She turns and there is Mr. Hart watching her, expression thin as paper. For a moment, the air feels slick with something that isn't quite fear and isn't quite sleep. She can't put a name to it. It is then she remembers the small details swapping in and out of memory. Mr. Hart's polite questions about Jake's job, a fixation on Mia's little freckled knee, a story of how his sister lost a child years ago, told with a slow sadness that lands heavy on anyone who listens. She begins to stitch things together, half guessing, half terrified that she is inventing meaning to fit noise. The trust she extended now sits like a hinge with a crack. They stand at the edge of the park where the shadows of the old stone fountain still cling in the corner. Mr. Hart says, "Let's call the police again. Stand together." His hand tightens another fraction on hers. She feels the palm, warm and oddly calloused. Comfort or something else? Choice 3. Relying on institutions versus taking action. The police station has rules and forms and the comforting hum of bureaucracy that can make grief feel organized. When the desk sergeant recommended waiting, he had intended to comfort. He had pulled out a phrase that schemed to limit his involvement, to shelter him at the cost of immediate help. It is an old institutional reflex, better paperwork than panic. Daphne has believed in institutions all her life because they are the scaffolding on which ordinary lives are built. Schools, lanes, ticket windows, the postal service that counts for details small and large. Tonight, she finds that scaffolding slow against her panic. Mrs. Adebayo clutches her coat tighter around her shoulders as if to hold something in. Across the cul-de-sac, a woman tapes a child's crayon drawing to a telephone pole. "Have you seen this girl?" printed in thick marker. A crow watches from a farmhouse roof. The town becomes a collection of gazes, curious, kind, indifferent. The band of people searching becomes ritualistic. They call Mr. Hart's name. They call the laundromat where he spends afternoons folding his life neatly in quarters. They call the church. No one has seen Mia. At the police station, Daphne presses for more. "You can't just tell me to wait," she says, and the lines in her throat become maps for fury. She takes out photos of Mia, those tiny squares of time, with a bow in her hair, a face that turns toward the world with unfiltered trust. She hands the sergeant a picture and watches the pen slow in his hand. He rubs the bridge of his nose like a man wiping fog from a mirror. "We'll put out a BOLO," he says, an acronym that suddenly feels like an invention to not do the hard work. "Be on the lookout." He types into a box and prints a piece of paper that feels thin in the palms of their neighborhood watch. The machine rattles like truth forced out through a blocked throat. She could push harder, call the mayor, find reporters, make a scene. But she'll be pitted against the machine that believes in procedure. She chooses to trust that the system, however slow, will do what it is designed to do. It feels safer than making herself a spectacle. It is a choice out of fear of being wrong, of being dismissed as frantic. Also, there is the practical, the job she cannot lose, the rent that must be paid, Jake's school schedule. Each of those small, unromantic facts ties her hands again. When they leave, Mr. Hart says quietly, "Let me know if you need anything." There is a softness in his voice that ought to be reassurance. Daphne hears it as a promise and as a threat, both at once. She watches him to the end of his porch, the lamplight making his face an island of ordinary features. In the hour that follows, the town center becomes a collage of well-meaning attempts and silent assumptions. The bakery owner brings out coffee for searchers who have been out too long. Two teenagers sit on the stoop and smoke silently together, their faces boxed in by yellow light. There is a woman who hugs Daphne with a ferocity born of shared fear. "You did all you could," she says, and Daphne feels the words like a bruise. Choice 4 begins in a hall of fluorescent lights. It is where the wind picks up and doors rattle in their frames. Daphne stands at Mr. Hart's threshold with the weight of 100 small choices behind her. The shift she took, the nights she worked, the trust she placed in neighbors and institutions. And her feet are a metronome, striking time against the pavement. This is the point where choice fractures into action. She knocks. The sound of her knuckles hitting wood is loud and private, like a punctuation. Mr. Hart opens a sliver. He smiles with an openness that looks performative in the light. "Daphne," he says, "you're looking for Mia? Can I come in?" Her voice is a demand softened into a question. He steps aside, his porch suddenly a stage with a lamp that hums like a throat. Inside his living room, the television is on low, a program about a fishing competition flickering light into the space. There is a child's drawing on the fridge, a cat with too many legs, colored in with care. Then a sound, something faint and wrong, like a muffled cough that does not belong to someone watching TV. "She's not," he begins, and there's a gesture, a sweep that is both an invitation and a closing. Daphne moves without thinking, propelled by something older than resolve. She steps past him, and the air inside the house is warmer, laced with the odd scent of menthol and something sweet, like peppermint oil. The floorboards creak under her weight, a slow tally of footsteps. There is a sudden hush in which everything is magnified. The clock in the kitchen that ticks like a tiny drummer, the refrigerator that hums, the faint sound of something at the back of the house that could be the shifting of a dryer or could be the wrongness she is beginning to feel as a shape. Mr. Hart's eyes are too warm now. "I told you kids wander," he says. "Maybe she went with the Joneses to see the fireworks tonight." He laughs, a high, practiced thing. There is something about the laugh that makes Daphne's skin prickle, the way friction makes your hair rise. She moves toward the back hallway, toward the sound. It is then the house feels like a body, rooms as cavities, air that breathes in and out, and the shadows inside it are not just absence but presence with weight. They lean at the edges of the wallpaper, like stains that have gathered purpose. Later, she will not be able to precisely name the moment when the house closed around her and the world changed. For now, she only moves forward, and the choice to confront strides like a belt tightened until it snaps. She knocks on the pantry door, a nervous staccato rhythm that becomes a mantra. Something answers with a wet, rattling sob. Daphne's hands fly for the knob. The air that meets her is colder than the porch had been, and there is a metallic tang to it that catches in her throat. Choice 4, confrontation versus caution. She could have left, and there is no small person to remind her of that. No law says she must push into a situation that terrifies her. She could have called, waited for the badge and the call, for a march of officiality to make right the wrong. But faces do not please her anymore. Ports of procedure feel like a slow drain. She chooses the door. She forces it open. The pantry is a narrow space redolent of canned tomatoes and the dry paper of flour sacks. There is a space behind the jars of beans, a crawl space some previous homeowner used for storage. In that narrow hollow, muffled and small, something is breathing. Mia is there, knees pulled up, face streaked with the grime of a child's adventure. Her eyes are wide, and there is a small animal trust that collapses into sobbing relief. "Mommy," she says, the word raw as new tears. The noise the house makes when Daphne scoops Mia up is like a lid slamming. It is also the sound of air waking in lungs and hope lighting like a match. Mr. Hart's figure appears in the doorway with an expression that is neither pure warmth nor holy malice. Only a complicated, almost apologetic hollowness that suggests he knows too much and too little at once. "We found her," he says, voice neat as paper. There is something about the words that slides over the moment like a bandage, too tidy, too rehearsed. Daphne does not accept apologies. She accepts her daughter's body against her chest and feels the bone brittle of small bones against the soft of her ribs. But as she pulls Mia into the light, something in the periphery bends. The corners of the room, where wallpaper peels and the shadows have their deepest texture, seem to pulse like dark lungs. The sound in the house isn't only the living. It is something that breathes alongside them, a low undercurrent like the hum of tide under stones. She carries Mia outside where the air is a small, sweet bite. The neighborhood is a street of faces pressed up against windows. A man who runs a corner store cries openly. A woman in a robe whispers prayers in a vocabulary that the wind takes away. Mr. Hart lingers at his porch, hands in his pockets, watching as if the drama is a painting and he is one of those who sells admiring commentary rather than assistance. Her relief becomes a bright, thin thing. She is grateful, but grateful is an emotion with a tail. It draws the eye of suspicion. A child saved does not dissolve the aching daily forces that pulled her away from home in the first place. The house is a place that stores choices. Every shelf is a record. After they return home, with Mia asleep in her lap and Jake arriving breathless with news and apologies, with dinner plates untouched and the TV turned off in mourning for something unnameable, the town's moods rearrange. There are news vans at the end of the street, a nod at the new neighbor, as if he were the figure in the center of a painting they can all stop and point at. People begin to talk in corners about the kindnesses he has done. Others mutter about a hard luck and lonely old man. The fabric of suspicion pulls, threads taut and uncertain. Choice 5 waits like a held breath, deeper and darker. Daphne feels it in the way Mia sleeps now, like a small clock that has been wound and left to tick with a small tremor. At 3 in the morning, when the house is a small, vivid moon inside its walls, Mia wakes and whispers about shadows that ripple along the bedroom ceiling. Daphne, metal strong with fear and love, pats a small hand and tells stories until the hours stretch thin. Shadows do strange things in a house where someone has been frightened awake. They map themselves against the ceiling fan's slow spin, like a theater's curtains. When she wakes in a cold sweat the next night, there is a small, unnatural sheen on the surface of the table by the bed. A mark, as if something had run a hand across it. Not quite wet, not quite the residue of a spill. Mia says nothing, but her thumb is clamped to the hem of her blanket like a child who has chosen to hold on to something because it is familiar. The motif begins. The more Daphne trusts, the more the edges of the world sharpen into hazard. Choice 5. Violence or force to rescue. The next time Daphne goes to Mr. Hart's, she is not the same woman who had asked to come inside. The choice she contemplates is one between waiting for the rules of society to catch up, a long, slow machine, or taking direct action by which the immediate threat may be ended, but a deeper one might be awakened. She does not want to become the kind of person who breaks down doors, who injures someone who might be harmless. But she also does not want to bury her child inside something that bricks and dust can never touch. She chooses force. The memory of the day she first learned to fight sits like muscle memory. She had stood up for Mia in kindergarten once when a boy pushed her toward the coat rack. The teacher called that a scene and called her mother to tame the moment. Daphne had not been tamed. She had taken Mia's small hand and said, "You will not be pushed." The boy's mother later apologized and brought a box of cookies. The lesson that became permanent was not that violence is right, but that sometimes bodies must be the argument. At the hardware store, she buys a pry bar, something with weight and teeth. She buys a thin roll of nylon rope and a lantern that glows with an unnatural blue. The cashier is a young man with a shy smile. He rings up the items as if they are ordinary. Daphne feels absurd and embarked at once. Her hands tremble when she puts the purchases in the trunk. At Mr. Hart's house, the porch light seems unnaturally bright, as if someone is casting a stage for drama. She pushes the door and lets the pry bar find the humidity in the frame, the giving point where wood resists and then yields. The same muffled sound as before flutters through the walls like a trapped bird. Daphne's breath is a small engine. She moves through rooms she has seen before with eyes that are now strangers, mapping what is there. Teacups, a rusted radiator, a set of old board games stacked on a shelf. The light from her lantern paints the corners in icy blue, sharpening edges into teeth. The pantry door resists differently this time, as if it is protecting something that has learned to be guarded. She wedges the bar between the door and its frame and applies pressure. The wood splits with a sound that is both triumphant and sacrificial. In the broken dark, there is a flash, a sliver of metallic light, like a blade catching a street lamp. Something moves in the corner, not animal and not quite human. Mia is there again, curled and small, but this time the breathing around her is wrong, thick and heavy, like an animal dreaming under a net. As Daphne reaches toward her, something shifts at the threshold of her vision. For an instant, she sees detail that shouldn't be seen. The shadows lengthen and take on the shape of hands, reaching, waiting at the edges of furniture. The lantern's blue halo flickers, and in that moment, a sound enters the room that is not the house or Mr. Hart or even the world she knows. It is like a chorus humming under a church, a low vibration that seems to speak into the bones. The pry bar glances off something, and there is a sudden scent, not of rotten things, but of cold earth and rain. The shadows recoil in a fluid choreography as Mia squeezes her eyes shut and whispers something that is not a child's word. Daphne does not know the word, but it acts like an anchor. The presence stutters as if surprised by a language it does not know. She seizes Mia, slinging her into her arms with a force that makes the child yelp. The lantern lights an object on the shelf, a knife, old and dull, with a carved wooden handle. It is at once ordinary and not. Its surface picks up the lantern light and seems to pulse. Daphne's fingers close around it, and for the first time a warmth spreads into her hand that is not the warmth of breath or blood. The blade does not slice, it feels like it hums. Choice 6 crouches like a beast as the knife hums and the shadows gather. The argument that would normally be legal and properly spoken, call the police, wait for backup, falls away under the pressure of the weight of a child in her arms and the hum in the blade. The choice speaks quietly and demands a currency Daphne knows. What will she not live with? What will she be willing to trade to take her daughter out of whatever thinness has latched onto them? She may take this blade and drive it into the heart of whatever is pulling at the edges of their lives. She may swing and claim and wound. Or she may keep it as a talisman and walk away, a woman who carries an artifact like a secret under her shirt. She chooses to use the light. The knife glows, not with flame, but with a colder radiance, like moonlight carved to fit the palm. It does not require manipulation. It answers the look in her eye and the way she holds Mia close. She lifts it in a motion that is less a strike and more an invocation. The glow sharpens and the shadows retreat as if something recoils from truth. The first moment of contact between the glow and the dark is like watching frost form on glass. The darkness congeals and then cracks, a thin line of black that unravels into a ribbon. The house convulses with a sound like wind in a canyon. Something in the wall shudders and retreats. But every act of pulling light from shadow has a price. The hum in the blade shifts, and for the first time, Daphne feels the cost not as an idea, but as a tangible tug at the edges of her consciousness. The room feels fuller and colder than before. The hair on her arm stands to attention like a flock of birds readying for flight. Behind her, steps come quick and sure. Mr. Hart's silhouette against the pane of the nearby window. His face is a mask of ordinary humanity gone faintly wrong. An actor's expression when a line is missed. "You should have left it alone," he says, and his voice falls like a judgment. It sounds like the church bell of a small town calling for repentance. Daphne does not answer. Her arms are a cradle and a shield. She realizes, with a steady, funeral certainty, that the knife did not only push the shadow back, it woke something else. The house itself seems to breathe with a new memory, like a beast that has been roused and cannot go back to sleep. Mia's small body is a rhythm in her chest, and for a flash, Daphne contemplates what a mother will give in order to keep the rhythm. Choice 7, the last of the list that will follow them forever, stands at the lip of the scene like an uninvited guest. It is the kind of choice that will demand everything, or demand something she will never fully comprehend. It is not yet time to name it. For now, there is only the immediate. For now, there is the sound of retreating shadow and Mr. Hart's expression, which is now entirely knotted into something that could be contrition or something worse. Neighbors gather as if drawn by some signal. They line the street with the stiffness of statues. A child points at the house, and his mother's hand claps over his mouth as if to keep the word in. A camera flash goes off somewhere. A man murmurs a prayer, and another swears softly into his sleeve. The newspaper boy who had passed earlier now hands out flyers, his face pale. Someone calls the police. Daphne sits on her stoop with Mia asleep in her lap. The lantern's blue light paints everything in a confessionary hue. The town's voice around them is a collaged chorus, whispers, theories, the slow spread of rumor. Every face that shows up at dusk is a testament to the choices that have been made here. Some to stay, some to leave, some to trust, some to look away. Inside the house, the pantry door gapes like an open mouth. The shelter of possibility it had once offered is now a threshold in which reality has been permanently altered. The neighbors ask questions. What happened? Was he? Did she? There is a way that the world tries to make narrative out of trauma. They build it into something that can be explained and then file it away. Daphne hears their attempts like the rustle of paper someone is folding to make an airplane. She thinks of her own choices like beads on a string. Each one is smooth where it passes through her skin, and each one pulls in its own direction. She had chosen late shifts instead of steady presence, trust over scrutiny, institutions over action, then action instead of waiting, force over patience. Each choice had a consequence. Each consequence drew another option closer to the edge. The knife is warm against her thighs. Mia's hair smells like peaches and soap and the lake air they used to breathe on lazy summers. Daphne holds her daughter and allows herself a moment of plain, blinding gratitude. Her arms are a harbor. For a flicker, she believes the world is as it should be. Then the lantern flickers and the blue halo of light wraps around their forms like a halo of thin, residue truth. The shadows at the edge of the porch do not so much retreat as gather their breath. From the thinness between the houses, a voice comes, not wholly human. It is like wind over wire, like a voice stretched thin and then played back too fast. It says something that feels like her name and is not. The animal in her that knows primal things tenses and prepares for either flight or fight. If there is a creature that feeds on choices, it has been fed tonight. They will take Mia to the hospital, and they will be asked questions in a small room with paper chairs. The nurse will ask about food, sleep, family history. People will say everything possible to give the event narrative. But outside, the town will begin to look at Mr. Hart differently. He will be asked to move away or to explain, and he will give reasons that are polished like coins. There will be petitions, phone calls, signatures in ink. There will be late-night talk in kitchen corners and the swap of recipes for casseroles with a small, unspoken plea that order be restored. But the house remembers. The knife hums like a living thing under Daphne's palm. She feels its small, incomprehensible request. A debt to be named later, a promise of what will be demanded. Every rescue has a ledger in which the price is recorded. Choices do not evaporate, they compound. That night, as she rocks Mia back to sleep, Daphne feels something else unwritten settle into her bones. The knowledge that this was only the beginning. The shadows have been set back, for now, but they have only been prodded awake. In the quiet, the wind carries a thin sound, voices that might be memory or might be intent. At the edge of hearing, a whisper like paper moving in a desk repeats, choices, choices, choices. In the morning, the town will call it a miracle. Some will say the police were late. Others will say that Mr. Hart meant no harm. Some will talk about child wanderings and other small, rational phrases that make the world less frightening. Daphne will stand in the doorway and watch them say it all with their mouths. She will smile politely and nod, and she will not be able to make their choices unmake the dark that has been brushed awake. She thinks of the list she has carried since the first frantic phone call, the choices that led her to this porch. Choice 1, complacency and denial. Choice 2, trusting the familiar. Choice 3, relying on institutions. Choice 4, confrontation. Choice 5, force. Choice 6, the sacrifice she is not yet willing to name. Each one a bead threaded through the night. They are not mistakes she can pick apart like dried leaves. They are the kind of small, accumulative things that create history. Someone says her name across the yard. Daphne turns. Mr. Hart stands at the edge of his property with his hands in his pockets. His posture is oddly ordinary, but his eyes are not. For a moment, their gazes lock, and she sees a man who is both sorry and delighted at the same time, as though somewhere in him an appetite has been confirmed. It is a look that can be taken 1,000 ways, and Daphne chooses to read it as a challenge. The choices she has made so far have bought her daughter another day. They have not answered who else may have been touched by the house or what the light in the blade will eventually demand. There is a buzz in Daphne's pocket. The phone displays an unknown number. She stares at it like a cipher. She could answer. She could let the ring fall away and live in suspended denial. She could also pick up and step into a new conversation that might fracture what she believes now. As she lifts the phone, the shadows in the corner of her living room lean like listeners. If you like atmospheric, slow-burn stories, hit subscribe. She answers the call. A voice on the other end is too small and too clear. "You chose," it says. The line goes dead. Daphne looks at Mia, asleep like a small ruin, and at the knife on the table, its blade cool and ignorant of law. Outside, the town is a ring of lights. Mr. Hart's porch light goes out like a wink. She realizes then that choices have a way of being contagious. She had made several already, but there were more to come. Louder demands, harder prices. The list that will haunt their lives forever is not done. It drifts forward like the smoke after a candle is blown. Visible, smudging the walls, impossible to scrub clean. Someone at the end of the street is hammering something into a piece of wood. The sound is rhythmic and utilitarian, nails into a signboard. Daphne cannot see what it will say. She imagines many phrases. Be vigilant, beware, keep your doors locked. She imagines them all as lies that lot only partly true. She stands and the house seems to lean in with her. The checklist of small things she must do files through her mind. Change the locks, call the police, keep Mia home, tell Jake to quit his late shift, speak to neighbors. Each action is a decision, each decision a potential opening. The night has shown her that choices are less the act of reaching for something and more the act of leaving something open, a door left ajar for what will come when curiosity meets absence. As the morning grows thin and the sky becomes a pale sheet, Daphne braces against a cold she cannot explain and makes a choice that will be counted among those that haunt them. She will not let others decide for her what safety looks like. She will not entrust all to systems that move on their schedules. She will take the blade, learn the hum, find the line where light meets dark, and try to hold it there. It is not bravery. It is a ledger balanced by fear and love. She wraps the knife in a dish towel and tucks it into the back of the cupboard where the pots live. It is a small hiding place. It is also a promise. The price is still unpaid, and the shadows have not forgotten the taste of being left untroubled. Daphne doesn't know how to bargain with such things. She only knows how to count the choices she has made and to prepare for the next one, which is always waiting in the wings. Somewhere on a nearby porch, a shadow lifts like a hand from a pocket. The man who stands there watches her with an expression that is calm as snowfall, patient enough to let seasons change. Daphne looks at him and knows, with the same slow certainty that had guided other decisions, that she will never be able to restore things to what they were. Choices do not unmake themselves. At noon, the town will convene. At dusk, someone will lay flowers near the edge of the park. Knights will keep their teeth. There are 7 decisions in the list she has just begun. She has counted 6 that are already done. The 7th waits at the bend of the road, and it is a choice that will demand everything, or ask of her something she cannot yet imagine paying. The shadows that had been pushed back now brood like animals waking. She sits at the kitchen table and watches the sun cut a line across the floor. The blue glow from the lantern stains the wall in an offbeat wash. The house exhales. The world, for the moment, is a narrow ribbon of light. But always at the edge, there is a dark that does not sleep. Choices ripple outward. They do not remain private. They find ears and memories, they wake things, and they haunt. She does not sleep that day. She makes phone calls, she asks Mr. Hart questions about a cousin or a trip. She watches him as he answers with a face that seems to be rehearsing grief. She files reports, she knocks on the doors of those who have looked away, and she learns the ways people justify their distance. She feels the town's fabric fray little by little under the weight of the night. At the edge of afternoon, as the sun sits halfway in the sky like a coin balanced on its edge, Daphne stands in the hallway and finds, tacked to the door of her neighbor's house, a note that had not been there before. It reads only 3 words, written with a shaky hand. Choices bring consequences. She folds the paper into her palm and tucks it into her pocket. It is a warning, and it is a truth. The list is not yet complete. The house holds its breath, and somewhere in the dark, a small voice says something that might be a name or might be an invitation. The day closes around a pocket of light. Choices continue to echo. And Daphne, with Mia asleep on her lap and the knife hidden in the dish towel, knows that the next decision is one she will not be able to take back. Choice 7. The price of holding the light. Dawn has not yet learned how to be kind. The street is thin with bad coffee and cigarette smoke. People move like tired pages of a book someone else is reading aloud. Daphne sits at the kitchen table with a ceramic cup cooling in her hand and the knife wrapped in the back of the cupboard like contraband. Every time her eyes drift to that small bundle of metal and wood, she feels a tug in her chest, as if something small inside the house is reaching back. She thinks of all the things a mother might be called on to give, a blanket, a bandage, time away from work, and realizes that tonight she is being asked for something else, a ledger entry too large for currency. The glow she had coaxed from the blade was a light that pushes and demands. It answered to intention and to need, and in answering it also asked a debt be recorded. Choice 7, she understands now with a clarity that tastes like rust, will name what that debt means. Flashback. Her own mother at the sink, night jars calling outside the kitchen window, telling Daphne once, when she was old enough to count bills but too young to understand how much living drains, that safety is never free. Her mother had stained knuckles from closing jars, and there was a softness to the way she folded laundry that hid a hard certainty. Daphne had laughed then, angry at what sounded like coward talk. She thinks of that voice now and how small truths get larger with time. She wants to be the sort of woman who keeps a child safe without bargaining with the dark. But bargains are already on the table. Mia wakes at noon with a hunger that eats at the edges of whatever normal has been reconstructed. She sits across from Daphne at the table, knees swinging, watching her mother with an attention that sometimes makes Daphne feel like a lighthouse inspected by gulls. "Mom," Mia says, and poetry falls away from the room. "Did you see the man on the porch? He had sad eyes." Daphne smiles with the edges of a practiced lie. "Yes," she says, "he was sad. He was also a man who knew too many stories." She brushes Mia's hair. The touch is automatic, careful as someone smoothing a bruise under a sleeve. The town is not the same. There are people who leave casseroles on stoops like offerings, and others who cross the street when they see Daphne coming. Mr. Hart is a figure of conversation and of caution. Some neighbors insist on his innocence, others on his guilt. The local paper prints a grainy photo of his porch, and the town's comments gather like fat on soup, inevitable and hard to scoop clean. Mr. Hart answers with practiced sorrow and a story about a wife who died and a son who left him decades ago. He cries in the right places and smiles where apologizing would be clumsy. He is not punished quickly. Small towns have slow mechanisms for closing wounds. On the third night after Mia's disappearance, Daphne dreams that the house is full of loose doors. She walks through rooms that slide into one another like pages, and behind each door there is a version of Mia, older, younger, laughing, asleep, a small hand held out. The dream ends with a doorway that is mirror dark and cold. She wakes with her throat clogged and the taste of iron in her mouth. The knife hums faintly in the back of the cupboard. The hum is like an old radio singing when no stations exist. Neighbors hold meetings. Some want Mr. Hart watched, some want him moved, some want to leave it to the police. Daphne attends under the fluorescent glare of a community center and listens to people assign meaning to one night she can never undo. An older woman says, "We were warned, we were told to watch." A younger man, hair still smelling of beer, says, "We can't convict on fear." The room is a mesh of hearts and rationalizations. Daphne feels each argument as if it were a thread through her chest. Mia speaks rarely of the shadows. Sometimes she draws them, scribbles of black leaning over tiny houses, fingers like branches. Once she tells Daphne about a voice that called from the pantry and sounded like someone folding paper. "It spoke my name wrong," she says. Her face is solemn in the way a child becomes solemn when they borrow an adult's worry. Daphne presses a thumb to the small freckle on Mia's cheek. She will not let words alone protect her. On a wet evening that smells of rain and gutters, Daphne finds a note pushed under her door. The handwriting is small and careful. "We must choose what we will trade." No signature. The paper crinkles in her hand like a small animal. She could ignore it. She could throw the note away and return to sleep and normal. But the line beneath her fingertips is another pull toward a ledger. She goes to the cupboard and takes the knife out. The metal is cool and steady, warm only when she holds it for a while. The blade's glow does not come from flame. It is a blue-white, like a telephone screen in a dark restaurant, or like moonlight underwater. When she closes her hand around the carved handle, the hum fits to the shape of her palm, as though it has been waiting for that particular geometry. The world sharpens. The clock's tick is a metronome of warning. The house is settling becomes a chorus of caution. She thinks of what a sacrifice might mean. It could be literal, a physical surrender of some part of herself. Or it could be contract-like. Give up the right to forget, or the right to sleep, or the ability to be invisible to whatever watches decision like a hound. Sometimes, in stories, the price is symbolic. Sometimes, it is a law delivered without mercy. She knows only that she will be choosing between taking the debt herself or letting it be paid in another currency. Mia's future, perhaps, or the town's safety. That night, the shadows move with a confidence that chills the air. They are a chorus now, less discreet and more like a tide, creasing the house's edges. They press at window panes and gather in corners with a focus that seems new. When Daphne lifts Mia into her arms to soothe, the child's small body clings to her like a frightened animal. "Mom," Mia whispers, "will you promise?" Daphne feels the gravity of the question. She could make a promise and hope it would carry. She chooses instead to make a move. She goes to Mr. Hart's house. It is a stupid thing to do in some lights. It is a sane thing in others. She tells herself she will only ask, only demand the truth, only stand in a doorway and force a man to stand naked under the eyes of daylight. Whatever the pretense, when she crosses the yard, she understands that pretense is gone. She feels the knife heavy in her coat, a private cold heating to presence. Mr. Hart opens the door before she reaches the stoop, as if he had been waiting. His face is a study in practiced civility. "You again," he says, and the words sound like wind over thin metal. He steps aside with that same invitation she remembers, a porch turned theater. Inside, the house smells of menthol and old paper. The television is off. A pile of newspapers on the coffee table is folded like a fan. Daphne confronts him with everything she knows and everything she does not. "Where were you between 9 and 10?" she asks. Her voice is steady. She lists errands, small lies, the times he was seen in the park. He answers with facts that are mostly verifiable and a few that hinge on memory. He has an alibi for a bus schedule, a neighbor who will swear he was at the laundromat folding sheets. There are holes in his stories like tooth sockets. Every plausible detail is balanced with something that hangs wrong. He invites her to sit. He offers tea, and when she refuses, a chair, as if a polite world could be preserved with polite furniture. "I was lonely," he says at one point, a confession delivered like a child's apology. "I thought of children I once knew. I thought of what makes a small bit of company." His voice has a tinge of loneliness almost like gravitas. Daphne hears it as a kind of bait. "Did you lock your doors last night?" she asks. He looks away. "Yes, I lock for my own safety." His smile is small. "We have all been frightened, Daphne. You might not wish to assign a monster to every man with dull eyes."
She presses the knife deeper into her coat as if feeling its line as armor. "If there were voices in your house, would you tell us? If there was something in the pantry?" He interrupts with a laugh that echoes oddly in the room, like a recorded sound playing at the wrong speed. "You hear what you choose to hear," he says. "You see what you look for." She was hiding behind sacks of sugar. Children hide. They hide because they want to be discovered sometimes. It is their game. His hand flexes on the arm of the chair with a tension like a bird's wing. The house seems to listen. The shadows pause in their chewing at the corners. Then Mr. Hart's face softens into something that is almost entreaty. "You carry something," he says. He gestures toward her coat where the knife is secreted. "You carry light and anger. Maybe that is why they came back." For a single breath, Daphne considers leaving, folding herself into some version of common sense and letting the police process the evidence. Then she thinks of Mia's small thumb tucked under a blanket, and the way a child looks when she trusts you to hold the world in place. She thinks of the hum, the way the blade answered her, and she thinks of the note pushed under the door. "We must choose what we will trade." Choice 7 demands language, a currency. Daphne lays the knife on Mr. Hart's coffee table between their hands, like laying down a pact. The metal gleams under his porch lamp. He looks at it long, as if measuring the distance between something he lost and something he might gain. "I cannot let this happen to her again," she says. It is both a statement and an equation. "I will bargain, but I will not bargain Mia away." Mr. Hart tilts his head in a way that could be pity, could be scalpel. "And what will you trade?" he asks. "Memory? Time? The small invisible things we rarely notice until they've been taken?" Daphne hears the bait. She recognizes a predator in the shape of a question that asks you to enumerate what you own. He is fishing for a weakness, for a name to call up from the inventory of her life. She thinks instead of making a different kind of offer, a direct payment in presence. She will take the debt onto herself. She will become the thing the house remembers instead of Mia. It is a bargain that costs dearly. Presence, as she understands it, is not only a resource, it is a portion of oneself. She chooses. "I will go where I must," she says. "If the cost is mine, make it mine. I will bargain, but I will not bargain Mia away." Mr. Hart tilts his head in a way that could be pity, could be scalpel. "And what will you trade?" he asks. "Memory? Time? The small invisible things we rarely notice until they've been taken?" Daphne hears the bait. She recognizes a predator in the shape of a question that asks you to enumerate what you own. He is fishing for a weakness, for a name to call up from the inventory of her life. She thinks instead of making a different kind of offer, a direct payment in presence. She will take the debt onto herself. She will become the thing the house remembers instead of Mia. It is a bargain that costs dearly. Presence, as she understands it, is not only a resource, it is a portion of oneself. She chooses. I will go where I must, she says. If the cost is mine, make it mine. Mr. Hart smiles with the slow calculation of a man who has held many such hands before. Perhaps in other towns, perhaps in other lives. Then we will be witnesses, he says. We will make a trade in the open. He leads her into the pantry. The place is the same hollow, the gap behind sacks of flour and rows of canned tomatoes. But now there is a brightness within the darkness, threads of blue light caught like veins in the wallpaper.
Beneath everything else, there is a smell she now recognizes. Not rot, not earth, but like the inside of a bell, metal pressed thin and hung to ring. The shadows gather like an audience. They lean toward the threshold as if drawn to musty perfume. They are less a collection of absence now, and more a presence worked into a will. Daphne feels the air grow heavy around the knife as she lifts it. The blade's glow reaches toward the dark with the slow certainty of tide. Place the knife between you and what you ask to take, Mr. Hart instructs. Offer yourself as the fulcrum. He may be helping. He may be guiding a ritual. He may be a man who is only pretending to share in a girl's sacrifice to better learn how to fish with the rest of the town's fears. Daphne cannot know which. She knows only that there is a way to take a stand that is also a surrender. She lifts Mia and places her small body on the floor of the pantry. The little girl blinks up at her like someone confused by the staging of a play. Mom? She speaks into a space that has teeth. Stay in the light, Daphne says. Do not look at the edges. Do you understand? Mia nods like a soldier, the small face corroded by gravity. Daphne puts the knife at the threshold of the pantry and stands with her back to the open room. The shadows press just beyond the blade's halo, like smoke stopped by glass. You will name what you ask, Mr. Hart says, and his voice becomes softer. Say it plainly. Daphne draws a breath the size of a bell. She thinks of all the things she might give, years, memory, sleep, and chooses a thing that, once given, will make her safe in one way and forever altered in another. She will give the right to be seen by the shadows. She will become the shadow's harbor instead of Mia. They will not touch the child if they touch her first. It is a monstrous ledger, and yet it is small and maternal and terrible all at once. I give you my name, she says, in a voice that feels thin as paper. I give you my right to be remembered by strangers. Take my presence from them. Let them forget me when they walk past. Leave Mia untouched. The words leave her mouth like a small incision into the world. Mr. Hart's eyes brighten, not with glee, but with the satisfaction of a bargain made. The shadows lean forward like an audience leaning in to the climax of a play. There is no thunderclap. There is a sound like rain in a metal bucket, steady and precise. The blade shivers in the threshold. Something like a wind passes through the pantry, as if a door somewhere opened. Daphne feels a pull at the back of her neck, a gentle, inexorable tug, like a hand asking her to step through. She keeps her feet planted. She holds Mia's hand and squeezes it until the child's small fingers blanch. The glow in the blade flares, a white blue that takes the edges of the room and sharpens them into teeth. You will name what you ask, Mr. Hart says, and his voice becomes softer. Say it plainly. Daphne draws a breath the size of a bell. She thinks of all the things she might give, years, memory, sleep, and chooses a thing that, once given, will make her safe in one way and forever altered in another. She will give the right to be seen by the shadows. She will become the shadow's harbor instead of Mia. They will not touch the child if they touch her first. It is a monstrous ledger, and yet it is small and maternal and terrible all at once. I give you my name, she says, in a voice that feels thin as paper. I give you my right to be remembered by strangers. Take my presence from them. Let them forget me when they walk past. Leave Mia untouched. The words leave her mouth like a small incision into the world. Mr. Hart's eyes brighten, not with glee, but with the satisfaction of a bargain made. The shadows lean forward like an audience leaning in to the climax of a play. There is no thunderclap. There is a sound like rain in a metal bucket, steady and precise. The blade shivers in the threshold. Something like a wind passes through the pantry, as if a door somewhere opened. Daphne feels a pull at the back of her neck, a gentle, inexorable tug, like a hand asking her to step through. She keeps her feet planted. She holds Mia's hand and squeezes it until the child's small fingers blanch. The glow in the blade flares, a white blue that takes the edges of the room and sharpens them into teeth.
Something passes along her body like a river, cool and impossibly ancient, and she feels her name slip like a small stone from the mouth of her chest. It echoes not in her ears, but along the walls of the town, as if the town itself is being asked to forget. She steps backward once, twice, and the world moves in small calibrations. Mr. Hart's face loses its edges as neighbors who have been talking outside the house begin to stir, their expressions smoothing into polite anonymity. The man at the corner store looks up and cannot remember why. A woman across the street who had been knitting a scarf looks and sees Daphne but cannot say her name. The world around her blurs pleasantly into generic faces. Daphne feels the odd elasticity of memory bending. Neighbors who had known her name revert to calling her the woman with the small child. Her voice grows thin when she tries to call out to Jake, who is across the street smoking, and suddenly looks away as if to avoid making a scene. Mia watches her with the clarity only a child can have. She is frightened but not confused. "Mom," she says again, and the syllable carries weight. "It's okay," Daphne whispers. The word is an anchor that feels less like a name than like a promise. She allows the world to take her name gently as a thief would take a jewel from a sleeping neck. The shadows fold themselves like pillows around the space she is leaving, not cruel, but indifferent and patient. When it is done, there is a hush that is deeper than the prior hum. The pantry's glow bleeds into the room like watercolor. The knife lies on the floor, its light sputtering like a distant lighthouse. Daphne feels no less herself. She still thinks, still remembers. But the name that would have been spoken by strangers slides into a fog. People will glance at her face and feel a small, inexplicable looseness, like they have lost a thread but cannot say where it came free. Mr. Hart exhales and his posture relaxes. "Now you are safer," he says. "Now you are less of a beacon." Daphne takes Mia into her arms and steps into the kitchen. The town is momentarily peaceful. People who had been watching begin to drift away with casserole dishes and murmurs of, "We must be kinder." The night settles like a quilt. In the days that follow, the trade becomes visible only in small, corrosive ways. When Daphne walks into the grocery store to buy milk, the cashier asks a discount question and then, mid-sentence, names her as ma'am and forgets the string of Daphne that had been rehearsed into memory. Her name thins in databases. Forms come back with blanks where mother's name ought to be, as if an administrative ghost has eaten ink. Jake writes her name on a grocery list and then scratches it out, as if bored. He calls her Mom the way one says Mom to the air. The town's memory has been altered like a photograph slid into different lighting. Worst of all is the phone. Calls that used to start with, "Hi, Daphne,"
Now begin "excuse me" or The small familiarities that had once kept her human are shaved away. Letters arrive addressed less personally. The daycare fails to list her in one roster even though she has signed in 100 times before. Friend after friend claims to have not known the full story. Meetings to support her are held as if she were not the center of them. The world forgets the name by which she had been called, and, with it, some of the care that purpled around her in that particular way. There is a triumph in that forgetting. Mia is safe in ways that are real. The shadows no longer reach for her small hands. They sniff like dogs at the margins and pull back when the child is near. The knife's light, when Daphne lifts it again, answers with a different hue, less like rescue and more like a ledger being tallied. The price she paid is exacting and not wholly unkind. Strangers no longer look at her with the same recognition that demanded something from their conscience. They walk by more easily. They do not linger. Sometimes, at night, she hears the city forget her name. Phones without messages, a voicemail greeting that uses a different voice for hello. The world is easier to be in, yet somehow lonelier. Mia, however, begins to change in small, uncanny ways. She hums under her breath the way a child does when their dreams have been occupied. She will sometimes stop mid-sentence and ask, "Do you remember when I fell into the lake?" There are no memories to that effect. She can draw maps of Mr. Hart's house without having been shown one, little blue lines where shadows crawl. Once, she points to a place on the staircase and says, with the brusque certainty of childhood, "That's where it smells like bells." Daphne's arms itch with both pride and fear. The bargain is keeping its side, but it is not without its stitches. Jake reacts differently. He quits his night shift and hovers at the edges of being helpful. Without the anchor of her name, small slights accumulate. An unreturned call here, and impatience there. He means well, but his presence is a set of practicalities rather than the specific kindness of knowing. Communities have a way of rearranging themselves around absences. Someone becomes the person who runs to fix things, someone else the one who drinks more at the bar. Mr. Hart leaves the town quietly after a week of careful talk and neighborhood pressure. He packs a single suitcase with the slowness of someone extracting himself from the parts of his life he cannot salvage. No one holds him accountable in the way Daphne might have wanted. The law moves like a river around stones. He is replaced in the gossip by other features, utility bills and school fundraisers, and the sudden vacancy of his porch light. The knife remains in the cupboard, wrapped in the same dish towel. Occasionally, Daphne takes it out and runs a thumb along the carved handle.
The hum under her skin returns, like a reminder that debts don't close, they change shape. Sometimes the light answers her touch, flaring around the edges like a contained star. Sometimes it is dull as old tin. She learns to modulate it, timing its glow to small rituals, holding Mia, standing at a neighbor's vigil, lighting the lantern on a night when a child's scream cuts the town. There are nights when Daphne regrets the bargain. They are sharp and immediate, the kind of regret that wakes you at 3 a.m., the kind that tastes like copper and regrets permission slips. She cries alone in the bathroom and lets the hot water loosen her shoulders. She thinks of the name leaving her and how the world stopped holding her in a particular way. She thinks of the town's faces and their missing stitches. But then Mia laughs at something small and breathes in air that does not reach for her like a hand. There is a cost and a blessing braided into the same rope. The shadows, for their part, do not disappear. They change how they approach, testing the margins rather than attacking outright. In the beginning, they had leaned like weather. After the bargain, they become more cunning, as if feeding on a different currency now. The small pleasures that are left every day to be stolen. They nibble at Jake's nights, make the cat refuse to sit by the doorway,
Put damp spots on the curtains that look like handprints. They whisper to children in the market and shift the pages of newspapers when someone is not looking. The house itself keeps the scars of those encounters. Sometimes the pantry door clicks on its own, and the smell of metal returns like a memory recalling rain. Months pass. Life knits itself into a new strain. The town hosts a small picnic for children to mark the end of summer, and Daphne sits on a folding chair with Mia at her feet, a blanket taut around them. Parents talk in examples and statistics, and everyone smiles because smiling is a necessary armor. A boy points and asks Mia to draw him a picture. The child obliges, sketching a house with blue lines and heavy black fingers. The boy laughs, and the sound is bright. The day is sky clear and ordinary, and, for a while, nothing nudges the edges. That evening, someone puts a small, unintelligible note on Daphne's door. It reads, 7 choices. Each one takes something. Keep what you can. Then there is a little sketch of a house with too many eyes. She fingers the paper until it wrinkles. She cannot tell who left it. She keeps the note and places it in the small shrine she has made on the kitchen table. A place with family photos, a mug with chipped glaze, the knife wrapped in a clean towel. She does not want it to be evidence. She wants it to be a geometric reminder. On the day she refuses to speak, she understands the trade more fully. She goes to a grocery store, and a woman asks something about the bank. Daphne answers and gets no recognition. Her voice is returned like change. She will sometimes ask questions about the night that are practical and sharp. Why did you do it, Mom? Was it scary? She will demand, in the way children do, the shape of things. Daphne will answer truthfully in the only way she can, with touch, with presence, with stories that measure love rather than logic. In evenings when the world is quiet and the shadows gather beyond the porch light like a patient audience, Daphne recounts the list to herself quietly, like a woman checking inventory. She names them in order, sometimes as admonition and sometimes as prayer. Choice 1. Complacency and denial. The tiny concessions made quietly, the short hours taken for pay. Choice 2. Trusting the familiar. The neighbor whose warmth turned paradoxically dangerous. Choice 3. Relying on institutions, waiting for systems that move on their own calendars. Choice 4. Confrontation, the knock that opened a door into other things. Choice 5. Force, the breaking of frames to reclaim what was lost. Choice 6. Bringing light, the first act of defense that woke larger things. Choice 7. Sacrifice, the ledger, the name traded to secure another's life. Each one is a link. Each one is a thing people will whisper over casseroles and at vigils. Each will be cited and excused and justified. Each will keep the house from being simple again. They will haunt. They will ask questions of the town, of the family, of anyone who listens. Sometimes, at the edge of mourning and relief, Daphne thinks of names as anchors made of speech. She wonders what happens when society takes away the anchor that calls you into common care. Is it possible to be protected and erased at once? She has become an argument for both. On a late autumn evening, as leaves move in small scraps across the pavement and the street light hums like an old complaint, Mia runs from the house to the swing set and calls, "Mom, watch." Her laughter is a bell, clear and filigreed. Daphne watches and feels something unclench in her chest. The shadows, present at the edge of the property like weather, do not reach. They circle, learning the new mathematics of what they can take. The light holds for a moment with no price extracted beyond the one already paid. She goes to the porch, the knife folded and safe in its dish towel, and picks up the small paper left on her mat weeks before. The words "choices bring consequences" have been smudged by rain. She smooths the page and tucks it into a book where it will remain for a long time like a bookmark in the story of a life. She will carry the list like a map on the inside of her ribs. She will teach Mia to notice doors that are left open and to ask questions before stepping through. She will teach her to trust, but to also keep the thickness of skepticism in the place where it is needed. She will teach her to carry light in a way that does not cost the names of others, if that is possible in the plural world of choices. There is no final triumph and no clean closure. The shadows are not destroyed. They are negotiated with bargains made at the altar of maternal love. The town keeps living around its edges. The man with sad eyes leaves and carries, perhaps, the memory of what happened like an unhealed bruise. People switch the words they use. They are smaller terms for comfort, perhaps, but they will do for the living. On the porch, with the night breathing in and out like a slow patient, Daphne counts the choices once more as a litany and lets it be both warning and testament. Each decision had a shape and a consequence and lodged itself into the bones of their lives. They haunt in the way houses remember, quietly, with a patience that outlives anger. If this story stayed with you, like and share your theory below.